So I'm glad I'm on the RFP committee, because we're going to define the deliverables. We're going to let the bidders know what we expect from them. And that's my report. Oh, by the way, I'm sorry, I left one thing out. Princeton included shared services, and I haven't gotten a feeling yet. We are going to include shared services as an alternative, yes or no?
Yes.
Good deal. That's my report.
So just again, for the commission's consideration, one thing that maybe we ought to be less hubristic than.
Well, I used to be a salesman, so that's my problem.
I don't think we're in the business of doing management audits of either municipality down to zero-based budgeting. We're supposed to be studying the plausible implications of a consolidation. So that is a little bit of a twist off of what you were saying. You might, as you're writing, reviewing, just consider that as some friendly comment for me.
I accept the friendly comment. I need to understand it. Do you want efficiency left out, or do you want effectiveness left out? What do you mean by zero-based?
So
I know what zero-based is. And
I don't think we're in the business of saying this level of police service that exists in either community is staffed as the best staffing person.
Oh, okay. You don't like the best practices approach.
I'm not saying that. I'm saying it is not our job to review at that level the operational details of any particular governmental operation with any community at the operational detail. I think, just in my opinion, the way ultimately this would be done to some degree is if each community agrees to a consolidation, there'd be a lot of detailed consolidation work that would be done. We have to be at somewhat of a higher level of generality and come up with plausible efficiencies and improvements that may arise from, if any, from.
Well, Princeton did that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think basically what we're talking about is due diligence, and it gets down to what we want the consultant to do, which will determine whether it's a real big price or a moderate price. But if that's a fundamental question, I mean, do we at the end of this study, do we want the consultant to come back to us, as you say, with best practices, as well as these are some of the opportunities that we see if you go forward with the consolidation, or do we want the consultant to come back to us with more of a high-level raw data and saying these are the things that you need to look at? And that's pretty a fundamental question as to how much money we're going to spend. And maybe that's an option A and option B to come back to you with.
Well, let's talk about that.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Yeah. So it's.
What do people think?
Yeah, I'm not certain, I think, because again, too much detail. You're going to have a study that will cost you $200,000,
Right.
which we certainly can't afford.
Right.
But I understand the importance of all that detail.
Is there a way? This is like for me. Is there a way of combining the two approaches in the sense that I'm going to say there's no point in saying ideally there should be a police force of X number of people with X number of things, because no ideal thing is going to fit in either now or in the future. It's going to be what budget constraints and all these other things have a lot to do with it. But the RFP and the report back from the commission, from the consultant, as I see it, would be saying these are the advantages of combining the police force. These are the advantages. These are the difficulties of combining the two police forces. These are the challenges that Cherry Hill Police Department would face in policing Merchantville. I think those are the kinds of things that I think most of our people want to know, and also that I would want to know. You know, and on the, like the Cherry Hill side, what would it cost Cherry Hill, and what kinds of staffing issues would have to happen in order to do an adequate job of policing? I'm just using that as an example. That's the kind of information that I think would be valuable to me. You know, not, this is, you know, with X number of people in this community, we need to have this many officers, this many sergeants, this many whatever. That doesn't mean, I don't know that anybody's going to care
But
about that.
that's the actual analysis that goes behind an RF, once you've decided that you want to move forward with the consolidation.
Right.
So that's the actual merger process
Right. That's not
of
the,
what you're talking about. But I think, because I don't think we know ourselves what we want, and maybe what we could do, this is something that we could talk about in the subcommittee, let's talk about, if we had all the money in the world, what would we want to see in this RFP, and then more realistically, what do we think we absolutely need, and then ask them to provide us with two costs. I mean, then it comes down to a matter of dollars, and this is what, if we did everything that we wanted, this is what it would cost us if we did this baseline, and then something
My
in
only
between.
caution, let's take education as another example. I don't think we would be in the business of evaluating the way, in detail, the way either community currently makes curricular decisions.
But you don't
Right.
do that in the RFP, you do that once you've decided to consolidate,
Right.
you get into the weeds.
Right, that's what I'm saying.
But we're not
Right.
gonna get into, we
Right.
can't get into the weeds.
But what we would want to see, again, tying the fiscal data to what plausibly an integrated school district would look like, how many students plausibly would come from the current Merchantville and go into the Cherry Hill school system, what would it, under current conditions, cost to educate those students, what potential savings might accrue out of that, and that would give us as a commission and the community a sense of, does this work for a consolidation of
I think we're basically saying the same thing. I think you're just getting into the detail of what you would like to see.
Right.
All I'm saying is that there's a lot of stuff on the table, and I don't know who made the suggestion, but one of you guys said, send the subcommittee what you're looking for, your questions, and I think that would be the best way to do it, but I think we're on the same page. I don't think we need to go into the weeds.
yeah.
But we need enough to make sure that we're making an educated
projection.
projection.
I completely agree with that, and I think that within that structure, I think it's important to come up with a couple of different scenarios
Absolutely.
as well. So I think there's, for lack of a better term, there's the platinum
Right.
scenario, there's the gold scenario, maybe there is the silver scenario, however we want to call it. What was that?
The hoopty.
Yeah, right, right. Broken down by potential budget estimates within
Right.
each, how much do we project paying for each of these different scenarios? And then work from there, and then feed the questions that we come up with into those different scenarios.
You're talking into the scenarios for purposes of sending out an RFP.
Right.
Okay.
So there's an RFP for a very detailed study, there's an
Gotcha.
RFP for sort of a hybrid, and there's an RFP for a more conceptual
Right.
study.
Any other comment? I have one comment. I didn't want to barge in. Everybody hasn't spoken. Okay. I like the idea where somebody said, well, we want to know what the pros and cons are to whatever the item is that we're looking at in terms of asking for analysis to be made. Getting into the weeds starts to border on, how about giving us also some rationale for the pros and cons? I think somewhere along the line you have to have some rationale.
Yeah, I think that's their purpose, isn't
Right,
it? I mean, that's the
right,
main purpose of the
absolutely.
consultant.
So we agree.
Because we could come up with our own ideas, this is what we think needs to go. But in order to get all the information to back that up, that's what actually we're going to be paying the consultants to do. And then to go to all the sources and say, this is how much it would cost for this is how much it would cost for that, this is a plus for this is not going to be so good for over here, so.
Now, I guess the only open item I haven't heard mentioned, where do we stand as individuals on this theme of best practices as a comparative? Is there some resistance there, some worry, some concern? Is it deemed to be perhaps too expensive to come up with because perhaps no one even has it yet? And therefore it would put a big burden on the consultant and a big price tag? You know?
I worry about that, and I'm sure there are some best practices I'd like to see them be followed. But the implementation, if the merger came about, that's when I think they would have to do that. I don't think
Right.
we could have a study to say, this is what you've got to do.
So-
That's
so-
not going to happen.
So best practices is, it would come after the study.
I think
is
so.
completed. That's what your feeling is. That seems to me too, because it's like, you need the overall thing first, and then you go into the detail, like this, compared to the perfect thing, if I'm assuming what best practices is, compared to the perfect thing, this is as close as we can come to that. Is that what best?
Well, I'll just give you an example. Like out in Sunnyvale, California, they have a beautiful website. And there's a section there on best practices, and they talk about what the cost per mile is to keep their roads in shape. And they compare to other towns, and therefore they have a goal there. And based on that goal of cost, they come up with staffing projections, you know, based on how many square miles the community is, that type of thing. Now, that to me would be really neat, but maybe that would also cost arm and a leg.
And I come back to, at least for my own taste, that level of investigation is not the task of this group.
I agree with Roger.
That's the way you all feel?
Of this group, I agree. That's what the governmental body should be doing.
Correct.
I
That's after we decide to get married. If we decide to, really, if we decide to get married, then part of the study is to get into
Thank you.
some of those best practices. But if we decide that, you know, we're gonna call off the engagement, we don't wanna spend money.